Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are on lesson 15, chapter 15, which is animating with CSS and the canvas. We're going to talk about how to generate CSS animation. We're going to talk about how CSS animations are different from transitions and how they're similar. We're going to talk about creating keyframes to hold and control animations, and we're going to talk about using HTML5 canvas element for self-contained animations. So in this lesson, it's going to go over doing animations in two different ways. One would be with CSS, and the other would be with JavaScript using the HTML5 canvas element. There's pros and cons to each one. Ultimately, you can decide whichever one you want to use for animating stuff on your website. There will be certain instances where it's better to do it in CSS, and there will be certain instances where it's better to do it in JavaScript. So you will have to make that decision. So in the beginning of this chapter, it talks about understanding CSS animation. CSS animations let you animate the transformations and transitions. Now, we talked about this in the previous lesson, lesson 14, transformations and transitions. So now we're going to learn actually how to animate them. We don't need to have some trigger event in our document, such as a click or hover. We can actually do them automatically now. CSS animation consists of two things, which are the styles that are actually animated and the keyframes that indicate the beginning and ending state of each animation style. For example, where does the animation start and where does the animation end? Do you want your animation to start from the top of the screen and go to the bottom? Do you want it to come from the left and go over to the right? Do you want your animation just to get bigger and then get smaller? You'll notice in your book it goes over 8 animation properties. These properties are fairly self-descriptive, such as animation delay, direction, animation duration, iteration count, name, timing function. And your book gives you a definition of what each of these are. The cool thing is you can combine all these properties in a shorthand animation property, and the order doesn't matter. So you can use any of these and all of them, or whatever ones you need, to animate whatever element you want to. In order to use these properties, you need to set up keyframes rule in your CSS. So to define keyframes, with a keyframe you define the state changes for an animation. And it gives you an example of how to define a keyframe. So that keyword from and to, that defines the start and end points of the animation. It then goes through and talks about how to adjust your animations, timing your animations, how you want to ease them in, ease them out. It also talks about how you can make an animation repeat with the animation iteration count. You can set it to infinite, so it just keeps going and going and going, because if not, it would just do it once and that'd be that. It then goes into using the CSS canvas. The HTML canvas element creates a rectangular region on a web page. So it creates this rectangle, and then you can draw within inside it. You set the size of this. You would also want to give your canvas an ID so that you can reference it in your scripts. And then your book goes through some examples of drawing shapes on the canvas. It shows you how to draw a rectangle or a square. So you can set the color, the size, the area. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to show you some of those examples in action and what they look like and what you can do with CSS animations and what you can do with JavaScript animations. Here are some examples. First example is animating a headline. I'll show you what it's going to do first, then we'll look at the code. When I load the page, this headline is going to come from the top and land here. So let's look at the HTML. All we have in our body is a H1 that says my headline, which is this text. What we're doing is giving our whole page that gray background. Now it can be any color. We're styling in the H1, we're saying position relative, giving it this font family, text align center, color red. And then we're going to say animation, my animation at 3 seconds. And then we have our keyframes, my animation, which is this. So whatever we called this, if we called it, we would have to then change this to the same. We're saying from top, minus 100 pixels, so it's off the screen. And we're going to say to 20 pixels from the top. Now if we said here 200 pixels from the top, and we said animation at 10 seconds, it would go farther down and it would go a lot slower. So you can adjust that settings, and that's how you animate a headline using CSS keyframes. Another example of animation using CSS keyframes is animating an object across the screen. So let's look at this. In this we have this H1 is just the text here that says the keyframes rule, and then this div is that box right there. So notice this div, giving it a width 100 pixels, height 100 pixels, that's creating that square background. We're using that gradient to create that background. Position relative, and then animation, my move, 2 seconds, infinite. So that means it's going to keep going. That's why it doesn't stop. It's set to infinite. If we didn't have this, and I reloaded, it would just do it one time and that's it. And it would only do it when the page first loads, and that's it. So we added infinite so it keeps going. Like I said, we can change the time. If we did 12 seconds, it would actually go a lot slower here. I just want to show you some things in action of what you can do so you understand what's going on here. From left 0 pixels to left, so if I change this to 55 pixels, this is where it's going from 0 pixels to 55 pixels from the left now. So if I reload this, it will only go 55 pixels from the left. So that's why you can set how far you want it to go, how fast you want it to go, where do you want it to come from. If we change this, say from top, it would then go from the top to the bottom. So you can try these examples out, and that's how you use CSS animations with keyframes. The next two examples are going to be with HTML5 canvas using JavaScript. So let's look at this code here. We're creating this canvas with a solid thin black border. That's what's here in the style sheet. In the body, we use the canvas, we gave it an ID, my canvas, set the width and height. That's this width and height right here. Now notice this is going to be similar to the one in your book where it has a triangle and circle, and the one I showed you in the PowerPoint coming up. But I just want you to see how it's created. So we do var canvas equals document.getElement by ID, my canvas, which is this element, context canvas.getContext 2D. Now at this point, all these do is create this canvas area here. If we want to make, say, a rectangle or a square, this right here, we use context.fillStyle, which is this, .fillStyle, set the color. If we want to add another square around this, like it does in your book, use the stroke style, stroke rectangle. So if I save this and reload this, it'll add that square on the outside. Same thing here. If I add another one, now this adds a red square around it. So notice how we're using that stroke style red, context.stroke rectangle, and we set this. So this original square is 30, 30, 150, 150. We set this to 40, 40, 150, 150. So it's a little bit off, and this is 50, 50, 150, 150. Now to make a circle. Notice at that point, just doing a start and end point doesn't do anything. We have this circle here. Let's look at what this is. So context.beginPath, context.arc, 200, 200, 100, start point, which is this, end point, set it to true, fill style. Notice this RGBA, this 0.8 here, this is what makes it see-through. So if I did 0.5, it would be even more transparent. If I did a 1 right here, it would be solid. I'm setting it here so you can actually see what's behind it. Now, same thing we did here, we did these outlines. You can give this circle an outline. You can't see it, but it's there. If I actually lighten this, you'll be able to see it. You can see that red outline. If we set all these to 0, we can have a black background. This is some different things you can do with making shapes with Canvas. Next example, how to create text using Canvas. So, same thing, we created our canvas here. So we did our canvas, gave it an ID, width, height. We styled it with a solid thin black border. And then right here, that's what we created. So we say get element by ID, my canvas, which gets this element right here. CTX equals get context 2D. And then we use this variable here. And we say ctx.font, 30 pixels Arial. And even at that point, nothing will appear yet. We need to actually fill the text. And this is the phrase, hello world. We can make it say whatever we want. And that is how you add text to the canvas using some script. So those are the examples. We talked about animating a headline to go from top to bottom using CSS keyframes, animating a box to move across the page using CSS keyframes rule, using Canvas, HTML5 canvas element with JavaScript to make some shapes, and using Canvas to make some text appear. I hope that example helped. I know sometimes seeing it in action makes it a little easier to understand. So next up, we have our PowerPoint presentation for lesson 15, so stay tuned.